Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Kendrick, president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, and I'm chopping it up with Buck.
All right, welcome to Chopping It Up with Buck. I've got Bob Kendrick of the Negro League Baseball Museum, and Bob and I have talked, and I've gotten to know him. It's interesting through a mutual friend of ours who is no longer here, man, but I still see him, I hear him, and I'm so happy that Buck ONeill kind of brought us together in a circuitous route. But I'm so glad to have you on today. How you doing?
Charles, man, I'm doing great, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be on with you. This has been kind of a long time in the making, but we finally got hooked up, and I got to thank my friend Buck ONeill for getting this connection generated.
Yeah. Well, I met him at it was in Indianapolis. I can't remember. It was a Circle City Classic, and he was actually speaking. And I was just blown away by his stories. I love great stories. And he was one
Yes.
of the awesome storytellers, man. Whenever you saw him on something, I had to turn it on. I had to watch. I got his book. I had my son read his book. I was a baseball player growing up, so I knew the Negro Leagues intimately because of my grandfather and other men around me, and getting to know even my stepdad, who his uncle played in the Negro League. So that part to me was just always, you hear the stories, but I don't think people know when you actually meet those guys and you get around them and you understand who they are, the value and how much you treasure that.
It's something that I feel tremendously blessed to have had the opportunity to know so many of those old Negro League players. And Charles, sad to say we've lost so many of them. And it feels as if we're losing them at, just a rapid rate.
Yeah.
And we knew that from the onset. When we started this museum way back in 1990, we knew then that it was literally going to be a race against time. It wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when they were all going to be gone. But man, what a tremendous blessing it's been for me. I got to hang out with Buck ONeill and Ernie Banks and Minnie Minoso and all these other Negro League players and hear their experiences and draw inspiration from the things that I heard and had them share with me. And now I get to share those stories with others now. I didn't live the experiences like they did, but I have these firsthand accounts to draw from, and now I get to share those stories with folks, and it's been a tremendous blessing.
What's been the biggest thing for you? You were a basketball guy growing up. I mean, we'll get into your history next time, because Kevin and I, my producer, are actually going to come. He was there for the Super Bowl. You guys may have met, but he didn't get a chance to spend time. I want to come and see the museum and come back when it's built. I want to make that almost an annual trip just to be a part of that. But what was it like hearing the stories, or what story have we not ever heard that you got to hear from any of those guys that you just mentioned?
There have been so many.
Yeah.
It really has. And Charles, I remember so vividly of walking into what was then a very much fledgling Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. At that time, we were across the street from where we currently operate, inside the historic Lincoln Building, in an office a fraction of the size of my office. And I remember walking into that office, and the late Don Motley was the executive director at that time. And I'm looking for this museum. And I peek my head in. I say, well, I'm looking for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And he says, son, you're standing in it. And little did I know, man, that I had literally just walked into what would become my passion. I fell in love with the story, and I fell in love with the amazing athletes who made this story. But I think the thing that surprised me the most, I knew that there was great talent that called the Negro Leagues home. And as I got more engaged in this story, it was clearly evidence that some of the greatest athletes to ever play this game called the Negro Leagues home. Charles, it was their spirits, though, that were captivating. That is what captivated you. Because, and I think most folks who are listening would agree with me, had they been bitter about the things that transpired in their lives, as they were trying to play baseball, every one of us would have said, you had every right to be bitter.
Oh, yeah.
But to a player that I have ever met, not one of them ever harbored any bitterness or expressed any ill will toward anyone who may have attempted to perpetrate something against them. And I found that spirit so endearing. It took me a minute to kind of wrap my arms around why this could be.
Yeah.
But first and foremost, man, they were never going to be bitter about baseball because they knew that they were playing the best baseball that could be played. Now, the world said the best baseball was being played in the major leagues. They never believed that. They knew how good they were. They knew how good their league was. And quite frankly, the major leaguers knew how good they were.
The stories are endless about them playing all-star games and the major leaguers getting beat soundly and beat by these guys consistently. And Satchel Paige talking trash like he normally would. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to throw. I'm going to throw it, and I dare you to hit that.
Yeah.
I love, but I guess Mike, the guy that I always look to, I mean, I love all of the guys, but something about Josh Gibson's story, it gives me goosebumps. Whenever I go to Washington National Stadium, I go by
by the statue,
and I
beautiful
just
statue of him.
Yeah.
I was just there a few weeks ago.
I've heard so many people, Buck being one, but others that talked about how the sound of the ball came off the bat and how Babe Ruth even said, this dude is the truth in those terms.
He was, in many ways, he was our John Henry.
Yeah,
he was our John Henry. He was almost mythical-like because of the power and the stories behind the power. But as I tell people all the time, Charles, the power was real. Now, everywhere you go and you hear the Negro League players talk about it, and you can see it referenced in many newspaper clippings, if you delve deeper into this, they don't measure places in the ballpark that Gibson hit the ball. They look at landmarks. Yeah, they look at landmarks. They say, you see that tree over there? Josh hit one over there. You see that warehouse over there? Josh hit one over there. Train track? Yeah, he hit one over there. That's how prolific the power was. But I think one of the things that surprises me, and we hear the story of how he is still believed to be the only man to ever hit a ball completely out of Yankee Stadium. That is prolific. Mantle hit one that hit the light stanchion that would have gone out otherwise.
That's true.
But you know what I find so interesting? People will accept that, but they don't want to believe that Josh could hit it out the ballpark. Well, if Mantle could hit the light stanchion, I know doggone well Josh Gibson could hit the ball. If you look at the physique of Josh Gibson, I tell people, if you want to compare him physically to someone, think Bo Jackson as a catcher, and you've got Josh Gibson. And so, but the thing that I think, for me, the most amazing feat of them all was he hit one in the right field upper deck in Yankee Stadium. He was fooled on a changeup, Charles, and hit it in the upper deck one-handed.
Golly. Yeah, it's amazing to hear those stories but you said something about not being bitter. But, I have to say, how do we carry on the tradition? Because there was a controversy with one of the baseball guys that got into, and I know I saw the whole thing that come to see the museum.
Yes,
he said something that sounded unlike Negro.
We had a phenomenal day today. Negro League Museum and Arthur Bryant's Barbecue.
I mean, there were a lot of folks who felt like my statement was justified and felt it was graceful, and that I wasn't doing it for any of that. I have to remain true to who I am. This man made a mistake. It was a horrible mistake. But once he issued his apology, and he apologized during the broadcast, apologized again after the game, and called me to apologize to me, man, that's enough for me. That's enough for me. I cannot harbor that kind of bitterness toward another human being for making a mistake, because in my heart, that is exactly what it was. Now, if you don't agree with me, that's fine. If you want to be angry and mad at him, at Glenn, then you have every right to do so. But please understand that for me, the person and human being that I am, I do carry a spirit of forgiveness. Now, I've been called Uncle Tom for carrying that spirit, and that's okay. Call me whatever you want to call me, but you're not going to change who I am as an individual, as a human being, and as a steward of this story where they were constantly overcoming this level of adversity. But this institution is predicated on that. These athletes never cried about the social injustice. Man, they went out and did something about it. You won't let me play with you. I create my own.
Well, and you bring up a really good point. Think of the injustices and the slights and the things that were happening to them in the Jim Crow South and all the other places where they had to go through. I mean, I got a chance to see the Indianapolis Clowns, I think it is, their facility before they kind of, I don't know what they've done with it, but I was living in Indy. And it just always amazed me at some of the, places, but some of these guys were forefront guys. They were the owners of these teams. Sometimes they took advantage of guys, but sometimes when they were right, it allowed us to have a game and have our own game and to prosper in that game. Yes. And what you've kind of been a steward of for such a long time.
Absolutely. You think about this, Charles. It is the only major professional league that has been owned by Black folks, the Negro Leagues. And it provided a playing ground for the best Black and Hispanic athlete to showcase their world-class baseball abilities, but it also became the third largest Black-owned business in this country. And so this was a thriving Black enterprise, contrary to popular belief. And the Black owners who financed these teams made pretty good money doing so. The ball players made a decent living playing the game that they loved. And so it is incumbent upon this museum to help bring the entire story of the Negro Leagues to life. When you come here to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, man, we almost de-emphasize the athletes because we already know that you're going to walk through that museum and you're going to meet some of the greatest athletes to ever put on a baseball uniform. And you'll hear me refer to them oftentimes as great athletes who just happen to play baseball because they could have played anything. When I tell people that Jackie Robinson's weakest sport, his weakest sport was baseball. I mean, it blows them away. But he was a much better basketball, football, track athlete, and Charles, some say an even better tennis player. So there was nothing that Jackie Robinson could not do.
Well, and I'm a UCLA guy, so when it still blows me away when I think of him and Kenny Washington, another forefront guy that we don't talk enough about.
We don't talk about
on that campus. But Jackie also, I got a chance this summer to just go and visit the Rose Bowl, and there's a statue of him out front of the Rose Bowl because he was at Pasadena City College, and his brother Mac was a hell of an athlete.
A tremendous athlete. Jackie swears that Mac was a better athlete than he was, which is absolutely frightening.
Yeah.
And you know the thing that I find so interesting, you mentioned the UCLA connection and Kenny Washington. We highlight Kenny's story down inside the museum as well in our new barrier breaker exhibit. Kenny Washington was actually a better baseball player at UCLA than Jackie Robinson was. And Jackie was likely a better football player at UCLA than Kenny Washington was, yet Kenny would re-break the color barrier in the National Football League, and then Jackie would break the color barrier and re-break the color barrier in Major League Baseball.
You talk about social change and justice. Jackie went through some things later in his life where people, branded him a guy that wasn't always on the forefront. But when you break a barrier, I think that you hold a special place, and he was trying to find his way. And I think, all of the things he had to take probably led to his demise way earlier than it should have been.
Yeah, no, he dies relatively young, particularly by today's standards, because he dealt with an insurmountable amount of pressure. I tell people all the time, if you do not believe that one man can invoke change, you need to look no further than Jackie Roosevelt Robinson. When he walked out on that field, and Charles, I mean this literally, obviously, figuratively, he was carrying 21 million Black folks on his back, because had he failed, an entire race of people would have failed. And the fact that we were all counting on him. So it wasn't just the social pressure that he was getting. He was carrying the weight of us counting on him. We were depending on Jackie to be successful because this was going to now open up greater acceptance of us in the eyes of white baseball fans and I think white people in general. So he's carrying this weight on both sides. Yeah, he has to succeed. He cannot fail. And baseball, as you know, is a game of failure. At its crux, it is a game of failure. If you get 3 hits every 10 trips to the plate, man, you're a Hall of Famer. That's how tough this game is. And he cannot fail.
Yeah. Well, Bob, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back on Chopping It Up with Buck.
At Heslop Wealth Advisors, our goal is to help small businesses develop quality retirement plans for their employees through our Lunch and Learn seminars. We provide lunch and learning tools to help your company succeed and unmatched customer service.
All right, we're back. We're Chopping It Up with Buck with Bob Kendrick, the executive director. I just say the guru, the PhD, the guy that. And Bob, I'm serious. We got to get back there, Kevin and I, because I think Kansas City. A lot of people know it for barbecue, but the Royals organization, and then also many others in that Kansas City community, have been so welcoming and been so good to you guys. What has that relationship been like with the museum and the city of Kansas City?
It's been tremendous. It's been tremendous. And I oftentimes say that the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum is Kansas City's gift to the rest of the world.
Okay.
But the love that we get here in Kansas City as one of its most unique and popular attractions, it has been amazing. And the support that we get from the philanthropic community here in Kansas City in particular is exceptional. Our relationship with the ball club, the Kansas City Royals, has been an amazing relationship and it's continuing to grow. And, just this year, for the second year in a row, the Kansas City Royals basically bought admission for any and everyone who wanted to come and visit the museum during the month of February. And we saw record attendance of over 14,000 people in the month of February, raising well over $120,000 in support for the museum through the generosity of the Kansas City Royals and Royals charities. And we're seeing more and more Major League Baseball teams come to visit when they make their way to Kansas City. Once upon a time, Charles, it was me calling the teams and asking, you got time, bring the players by here. Now the teams are calling me saying, we want to come and bring our athletes to your museum. And that just warms my heart, man, because the word is starting to spread amongst themselves. See, There's no better advocate than the guys who come here and then they call their guys and say, hey, man, when you're in Kansas City, you need to go by and visit the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And it never gets old for me. Every time a young athlete walks through this museum, and I don't care whether they are a baseball player, football player, basketball player, it doesn't matter. Whatever sports discipline, if it's a team sport and you play it professionally in this country, all roads lead back to the Negro Leagues. And the thing that I oftentimes talk about with them, the common denominator that they share with those who played in the Negro Leagues is love of the game. You play this game because you love it. But you will never see a greater example of love of the game than you do when you walk through the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. They had to love it in order to endure the things that they had to endure. And yet it never killed their love. Whatever the set of social circumstances they had to deal with, so be it. I'm going to keep playing ball. And really, that's the spirit that you feel here when you walk through this museum.
Yeah, you said the spirits, and I love that because our people have been that way. And when you understand the things, the trials and tribulations of slavery, Jim Crow, we still thrive.
Resiliency.
We still thrive.
It's all based on resiliency. That resilient spirit.
But the one thing that I'm curious about, because I've been to the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. I go to museums because I'm a history major and I like to see that. What has been the reaction of people when they walk in and they actually get to see the first time? Like they've talked about it, they can see it, you know, you can see it online, but it's nothing like. Tell me those experiences that you see from your vantage point of watching people actually walk through the museum.
They are blown away. They really are. They are amazed by what they learn. But honestly, Charles, they leave a little bit dismayed because you just now had an opportunity to learn this. You go leaving wondering, why in the world did I not know this when I was going to school? And the answer is very simple. American historians did us all a tremendous disservice. They kept this wonderful chapter of baseball and Americana away from us. So thus, we all went through our formal educations without knowing one of the most significant chapters, not in baseball history, but in American history. And that is what this rich, compelling, inspirational story of the Negro Leagues is all about. So, number one, I think they gain a much different perspective than they probably did before they came, because I do believe the moral majority of our visitors come expecting that this story is going to be sad and somber, because we know that it is anchored against the backdrop of American segregation, a horrible chapter in this country's history. But the real story here is what emerged out of segregation. This wonderful story of triumph and conquest, and is all based on one simple principle. You won't let me play with you in the major leagues? I'll create a league of my own. And when you stop to think about that, that is the American way. And so while America was trying to prevent these athletes from playing her so-called American national pastime, it was the American spirit that allowed them to persevere and prevail. And what's not to love about a story like that?
Yeah. I want to get back to our buddy Buck ONeill, who was not only a great player, but he was a coach. He did so many things, but what are some of the things we don't know or people don't know, like you got the opportunity to get to know Buck, that maybe it's just that even blew you away after so many years of knowing him, being around him?
Well, you know, like everyone else, when you meet Buck, it's love at first sight. There's no question about it. It's love at first sight.
And Bob, and that handshake, man.
Oh, big hand. Yeah, you better get in there. You better get in there good, because those big hands, man. That firm handshake. But that gentle spirit that drove him, you know, the human qualities of this man was just exceptional. And Charles, I asked him, I said, man, where did this come from? This amazing ability to love universally, to see the good in everyone, sometimes even when they weren't good. Buck saw the good in them. And you know what he told me? He said, my dad had told me when I was a little boy, treat every man the way you want to be treated. The golden rule. Now, we all know the golden rule. We just don't all live the golden rule. And Buck took something that his father said to him as a kid, and it governed him throughout his life. And he left a trail right behind him of those who were touched by him and their lives were changed. I witnessed this. I'm not telling you what I think now. I'm telling you what I know, because I saw this. The man never met a stranger in his life. If he didn't know you, he wanted to know you. And then you would meet, and the next thing you know, as you're about to depart, you're sharing an embrace as if you had known each other all your life. There was something very innate about this man. And I liken it to what you see with a Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a Mother Teresa, Gandhi. He just had that innateness about him, and the ability and the willingness to spread love, because as he would oftentimes say, it's much easier to love than it is to hate. Yeah.
Well, I love his story too. His nickname from Satchel was Nancy.
It was Nancy.
Yeah, and he always had great stories about Satchel Paige. What one that you like that he shared with you the best? I mean, you can talk about him throwing and making sure, but it just seemed like they were such good,
they were such good
friends.
They were such good friends, and Buck believed that, and he always said this: if I had one game to win, and any choice of any pitcher from any era, it would be the legendary Satchel Paige. Now, he said you might beat him when he was out there messing around. But Charles, when he was locked and loaded, forget about it. And so they're playing in the Denver Post tournament.
Yeah.
Satchel and his Satchel Paige All-Stars, and Buck is playing first base for Satchel's All-Stars. And Satchel's on the mound. They're playing an all-white semi-pro team from the Coors Brewing Company. And so Buck says the first kid gets into the batter's box, he digs in. Satchel throws him a fastball. Kid swung as hard as he could, topped it, dribbled it down the third base line. It stays fair. He beats it out and gets an infield hit. Well, Buck says about that time, one of the kids from the Coors dugout steps out on top of the dugout steps, and he yells out, "Let's beat him. He ain't nothing but an overrated darky." Well, I think Satchel might have been more offended by being called overrated than he was by being called a darky. And so Satchel looks over at first base and he says, "Nancy, did you hear that?" Buck said, "Yes, Satchel, I heard him." He said, "Nancy, bring him in." And so Buck is at first base, Charles. He says he turns and he motions for the outfield to take a couple of steps in. Satchel looks over at first base. He says, "Nancy, bring them all the way in." Honest to God's truth, y'all. There were 8 guys kneeling, 7 guys, kneeling around the mound. Satchel and the catcher, and Satchel strikes out the side on 9 straight pitches. Buck says Satchel looks into the dugout and looks over at the Coors team and says, "Overrated darky, hey." And of course, by now, the kid that said this, he was embarrassed. He was crying, and Buck said they all came out to apologize to Satchel and his teammates. But like I said, Buck ONeill swore to the day he died, if he had one game to win, it would be the legendary Satchel Paige that he would peg to go win that game.
I love every time I hear a story like that, or that story in particular, I love it because I can just imagine Satchel Paige.
Well, and here's the cool thing about it. As you know, for the first time, the Negro Leagues are in the video game MLB The Show. And the mode that features the Negro Leagues is called Storylines. And so I'm inside the video game narrating these stories. Well, that story that I just shared is part of the video game. And so through animation, you can now see what this looked like with Satchel calling the outfield in and the infield down to sit down as he proceeded to strike out these guys. And actually, as you play as Satchel, that's one of the things that you have to do. You got to strike out the side on 9 pitches and hard to keep advancing. And so now we're super excited about this video game and the reaction that this video game has gotten, because young kids and young adults are falling in love with the Negro Leagues through this digital platform. I got to admit, man, I had no idea that that platform is as large as it is. It's been amazing.
Well, let's talk a little bit too about one of the great legends, the Black Aces, Vida Blue, who just passed. That hurt my heart. I never got the chance to meet Vida Blue, but growing up as a left-handed pitcher, that was my idol. That was the guy that I looked at. He looked like me. He could throw. He was just, I heard a great man just from all indications. I've never met him, but just, so sad to see that. How well did you know Vida Blue? And I'm sure you guys spent quite a bit of time together.
He was a dear friend. He made a number of visits to this museum, playing in Buck ONeill's Golf Classic, and good golfer. And I would see him whenever I went out to San Francisco through his involvement with the Giants and out there in the Bay Area. 73 years old, man, that's too young.
Yeah.
That is too young. We lost him way too soon. And I don't know if people realize just how great a pitcher he really was. And as a matter of fact, we will open up a brand new exhibit the end of this month that honors the Black Aces. Late great Jim Mudcat Grant kind of coined that phrase to pay tribute to now 15, only in the history of Major League Baseball, only 15 African-American pitchers have won 20 games or more in a given season. Well, part of that is because that position did not transition from the Negro Leagues. there was this underlying belief that we weren't smart enough to play that position. But in the history of Major League Baseball, only 15. Mudcat was the first to do it in the American League. Of course, Don Newcombe, the great Don Newcombe, was first to do it in the National League. But we're going to take a retrospective look back and teach you about the great Black and Hispanic pitchers of the Negro Leagues. And then it moves all the way into Mudcat's group that includes, like I mentioned, Mudcat, Don Newcombe, Bob Gibson, guys who are still with us.
Bob Gibson, now that was a guy that I know from Dusty. Dusty would say, hey, he said the first time he got in the box against him, he asked Hank, what do I need to do? Because I heard you can't dig in, you can't do this. He told him a bunch of rules, and Dusty said, well, what can I do? He said, just go hit the ball. If you hit it far, just keep running, but don't look at him crazy.
Don't look at him. And so, don't look at him.
Like a silverback.
He was a fierce competitor, as fierce a competitor as I think we've seen, not only in baseball, but in sport. And people don't realize what a great athlete Gibby was. Gibby played for the Harlem Globetrotters. Gibby was a basketball star at Creighton.
I know he was a Golden Glove guy too,
and then went on to play for the Globetrotters before embarking on a Hall of Fame career with the St. Louis Cardinals. Tremendous athlete. So, he's featured in this exhibit all the way up through guys who are still with us, the CC Sabathias, Dontrell Willis, David Price, Doc Gooden, of course, Vida Blue. And we're dedicating this exhibit to Vida, with his passing. We lost Jim Mudcat Grant a couple of years ago, man, and there's a void in my heart. Every time we lose these are guys who were dear friends of mine. That kind of comes with the territory. You get to know these guys, and every time you lose one of them, you really feel like you've lost a member of your family. And to lose Vida, and it just was heartbreaking for me. And, I just send my condolences to his family and to his fans, man. We're going to miss him tremendously. But as we open up this new exhibit, it will be dedicated to the late, great Vida Blue.
So Bob, how soon or how long before you open up the new 30,000 square feet?
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be awesome. I can't wait to see where you are now, but also the new, the new location as well. Tell us a little bit about that.
As soon as I raise that $25 million.
Well, we're here to support you any way we can on topping it up with Bucks.
And thanks to my friends over at Bank of America, they made the first $1 million contribution. So I'm 1/25th of the way home. But Charles, I'm so excited about this. Again, think about this, man. A museum that started in a one-room office where they literally took turns paying the monthly rent. These were former Negro League players who took turns paying the monthly rent to keep the little office open, which allowed us to build our current home. And along that journey, we're now recognized as America's national Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And here we are now on the cusp of building an international headquarters for both Black baseball and social history as the gateway into historic 18th and Vine here in Kansas City. We're saving the old Paseo YMCA, which is going to be converted into the Buck ONeill Education and Research Center. Well, the YMCA is where the Negro Leagues were formed in 1920 and had been abandoned for years. So we're rehabbing that building, and then we will build a new structure attached to it, and it's going to give us 70,000+ square feet of space dedicated to this story. We, in essence, are creating a Negro Leagues campus. There will be nothing like this in this country. And we're very proud to be able to make that next big step in the growth of this museum. It is a daunting task, but I know that we are more than prepared to meet the challenge to raise the funds necessary to do this. And I think the world will be looking at Kansas City through the lens of the Negro Leagues.
That's awesome. Well, we have a thing called 2-minute drill, but I'll call it extra innings for baseball. Just a couple of quick questions, top off the mind, so we can get you out of here. It's been great. We got to do this again. It took us too long, but I'm glad we finally got
man.
And
I'm looking
next time
to
we're going to do it in front of you where we have some food. See, we usually like to go on location and just sit down and chop it up and just have a good time.
I can't wait. I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it.
So my first one for you, since we're talking Kansas City, I'm going to give you 5. Give me your top 5 barbecue places in Kansas City that you got to go to when you come to town.
Well, for me, it starts with Gates. Now, let me preface that by saying I'm a little biased because the owner, Ollie Gates, he's 90 years old. He's still doing it, still works in the restaurant. He is helping me build the ONeill Education and Research Center.
Okay, so Gates Barbecue is one of the top ones. We got to put him in there. That's why I gave you five.
Gates got to be at the top. Yeah, Gates got to be at the top of the list. I also am a fan of Kansas City Joe's.
Okay.
Jack Stacks. Then you got, the legendary Arthur Bryant.
Yeah.
And then there are two others that I think are really great. Char Bar, which is over in the Westport area, has some of the best burnt ends. And, burnt ends have become a kind of a delicacy here in Kansas City. And y'all, if you hadn't had burnt ends, man, you got to come to Kansas City and try them. They are amazing. So I would put them and Q39 as a wild card right there in my top 5 and 5A of places that you got to go eat barbecue when you come to Kansas City.
Well, you got us way down the field. We usually back you up, but man, all of those are good. And I've been to a few of them, and I got to try the other ones. I've had burnt ends, but I will never turn down any good burnt ends. I could eat them almost every day of the week. When you think about some of these great guys you've gotten to know, who is one of the most underrated or unsung that we didn't really hear about, but just his greatness because everybody else talks about it?
Yeah. And that player for me, and there are several, but I think at the top of that list is a Cuban ball player by the name of Martin Dihigo. His nickname was El Maestro, the master, because Charles, he could do it all. Played all 9 positions, played all 9 of them well. He is the only baseball player in the history of our sport to be enshrined into 5 different countries' baseball halls of fame.
Wow.
In the Mexican, Cuban, Venezuelan, Dominican, and in Cooperstown. 1 year in the Mexican League, Dihigo wins the pitching title, man. He goes 18-2 with a ridiculous 0.90 ERA. Oh, but wait, it gets even better. The sucker hits .387 that same season and won the batting title. And how in the world could we have not heard of a ball player of this magnitude? But that's the plight of the Negro Leagues. And that is why it is so important that you have a museum like this that can finally shine light on these, I call them baseball's unsung heroes. But there are so many others like Martin Dihigo. Yeah, my most recent episode of my podcast, Black Diamonds, I talk about the legendary Norman Turkey Stearns. Buck O'Neill called him the Gobbler. And of course, Turkey's one of those great nicknames in Negro Leagues, actually in baseball history. And Charles, he batted with a kind of pigeon-toed stance and had a little bit of a pot belly. And when he ran, his arms flapped like a turkey. But as I tell people, this turkey could flat out fly, man. 5-tool guy, hit for power, hit for average, could field, could run, could throw, led the Negro Leagues in home runs 7 times.
Wow.
7 times. We talk about the power of Josh Gibson. We don't hear about a guy like Norman Turkey Stearns. And the late, great, cool Papa Bell once said that if Norman Turkey Stearns is not in the Hall of Fame, then no one should be in the National Baseball Hall of Fame.
Well, Bob, you scored an easy touchdown with that. I knew you would. I just had to give you a T-ball and let you knock it out of the park. But man, thank you so much. I had so much fun. We could have kept doing this for a while, but next time we're doing it live. We got to do this consistently. Meet you at a ballpark. We'll figure out a bunch of different ways. And I love let us know here at Chopping It Up with Buck how we can help get the word out, make sure people know. I love the stories, but I also love the game more than anything. And I think growing up with my grandfather, who taught me the game of baseball from a historical perspective, he had polio, he couldn't play, but he knew all the stories, and he could tell me about the great players, and it gave me, and his big thing was if I'd hit home runs in Little League, I'd get a hamburger. So I'm out there trying to hit home runs for hamburgers and cheeseburgers. But I love that we can keep those traditions and stories alive and well. So thanks for coming on Chopping It Up with Buck this week, my man.
Hey man, it's been an absolute honor. Thanks for having me.